Baldur's Gate 3 recently received the highest Metacritic score ever for PC games, an achievement that to some of us is hardly surprising, but to many others seems to have shaken the very foundations of their beliefs about the gaming world. At the same time, Baldur's Gate 3 also achieved a new peak on Steam for total concurrent players of some 875,000 plus, that has exceeded its first week, something nigh unheard of in gaming, as typically when a game is released, it peaks in the first week and then faces inexorable decline, either gracefully or with the full force of gravity as it plummets into oblivion, lost and forgotten. And yet we see, almost in contravention to the laws established by the gods, something hitherto unheard of. Many of us, as already stated, are not surprised one whit as we celebrate Larian's triumph and rejoice in the blessings they have delivered unto us. But just as there are some of us of this mind, we must be cognizant of the fact that those of us who have been aware of and looking forward to Baldur's Gate 3's release were in fact a minority of the gaming world, and that for many people, the game had hardly existed, developers included. A month and some change ago, I talked about the fear that had been engendered by developers talking down to players about unbridled expectations in an effort, they might claim, to educate the lowly, benighted masses about the realities of video game development. And needless to say, this tactic backfired massively, partly due to the manner in which some of these statements concerning expectations was made, and partly, perhaps even in the majority, due to a misapprehension of the relationship between the developer and the consumer. And I want you to think about that for just a bit. Can you imagine any other industry where someone produces something and then tells their consumer that one needs to temper one's expectations about said product, and moreover, that the customer has to only accept a certain type of product as dictated by the producer? Imagine that world, and it would require great inventiveness on your part, I can assure you, because such a world simply does not exist. Shoemakers do not tell shoe buyers and shoe wearers what shoes they ought to expect to buy and wear. Diners do not dictate to those eating in them what they ought to or ought not to eat. And clothing outlets do not tell their customers to temper their expectations about the clothes they wish to wear, with the added addendum and admonishment of just how little the consumer knows about the process of fabric production. No, in this wacky world, as with many things in matters gaming industry related, we are dealing with a set of fairly unique circumstances. One might even say anomalous circumstances, found nowhere else in the marketplace of consumption. Originally, it was an emotion of fear that characterized the detractors in their scorn for players in Larian. But fear is an emotion more often than not born of uncertainty. And at the time, prior to release, no one could say with absolute 100% certainty if Baldur's Gate 3 would be overhyped trash or a game that would be remembered for years and decades to come. It seems that the latter has come true. And of course, there were mountains of evidence for this, but nonetheless, outsiders and those unfamiliar bore their skepticism and bore it well, till the bitter end. But we are no longer in early access, and the game has been out for close to 2 weeks. Promises have been made, and they have been honored, records broken, unforeseen heights attained, and the naysayers, confronted with this new reality, have no choice but to acknowledge that it exists, and thus of fear was born the green monster of envy and resentment. There are no more uncertainties concerning Baldur's Gate 3. All doubt that could have been justified has been swept aside by the tide of the reality of just how good a game BG3 is, and this has led to a new volley of ludicrous claims made by developers who seemingly know nothing about the circumstances under which Larian has labored. In their ignorance, some developers actually claimed that Larian had received funding from Wizards of the Coast, when in reality, Larian funded everything in this game on their own, and did not receive a nickel of financial support from the creators of the IP. They merely received the license to make the game, nothing more. And following this for the first time, in response to these either ignorant or fabricated claims, a developer of Larian had to chime in and correct the record publicly. All of this is of course unusual as interactions and game releases are concerned, but lest you misunderstand, there's something far greater afoot here than meets the eye. Many developers in gaming, above all those in the AAA sphere, exist in a sort of ivory tower, somewhat akin to academia, If you've ever been involved in academia or listened to academics talk about regular people, you'll instantly know what I mean. They exist in their own sphere, all the while talking about the people with whom they have little to do, and to be perfectly frank, often have contempt for. And so it is with many game developers, I've come to realize and notice over the years. Astride their thrones in the digital clouds, and yet they frequently labor to produce games for a population that they in fact can little countenance. And I believe the drama surrounding Baldur's Gate 3 has borne this out, as many of them look down upon the very people they depend on. Why? Simply because we are not game developers, so whatever we want cannot be justified or accounted for. And only they, in their infinite wisdom and with their endless experience, can give us what we truly need, because they know better than we do. And I'll not beat around the bush on this topic. This is little else than elitism, and it should be clearer now than ever that this contingent of humans in game development does exist, and that these people look down upon gamers, like us, and even I dare say upon other studios. And yes, I'm talking about Larian. This is simply a tale of David versus Goliath, of the little man versus the big man, of self-interested corpos versus that one guy who refuses to go along with the established protocol because he knows it's bad and that it hurts people. How dare Larian make a game that has appealed to a broader audience than one could have imagined? How dare they sink their lifeblood and their passion into this game? How dare they fund themselves? You have violated the tenets of corporate gaming, Larian. Therefore, you must be punished. How dare the foolish players enjoy the fruits of this labor? They must be admonished and enlightened because they know nothing. Because, really, at the end of the day, what this is resentment, envy, and frustration. The corpos would have been fine if Larian had simply made another nice little RPG like Divinity Original Sin 2, which, let us be honest, only true RPG aficionados had any interest in, but the fact is that it was limited in scope. Baldur's Gate 3 is an entirely different animal. The corpos think that a silly turn-based dialogue and quest-heavy RPG has no place in the popular zeitgeist of our time, because who plays that type of game, right? Weirdos, nerds, middle-aged people, and perhaps more important than anything else, people that are not their so-called customer base. And here's the rub. The simple fact that untold numbers of people who would normally have zero interest in a turn-based RPG are in fact playing it. And this speaks volumes, because I don't think you quite understand how little interest the average gamer has in computer RPGs. When I talk to people and they ask me about my gaming interests, I tell them I play mostly RPGs. To which they reply, and this is no exaggeration, "You mean like GTA 5? And sometimes, if I get very lucky, they might mention Zelda or Skyrim, but mention a more traditional RPG, whether real-time with pause or turn-based such as Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous or Divinity Original Sin 2, and they will gawk at you as if you had 5 heads and 3 tongues. And this in particular is why Baldur's Gate 3 is so groundbreaking, because it is bringing in an audience that historically would have had less than zero interest in such a game, for people unfamiliar with the genre, for them to play it, and then with great enthusiasm, and still further, for dozens of YouTube channels who otherwise would never in a million years talk about a CRPG, to be forced to talk about this game lest they miss out on views and opportunities. That is an accomplishment few games have ever achieved. Bringing in people from outside the sphere of traditional interest is no small feat. Bringing in people to play a turn-based CRPG is a still greater feat. And that's why the corpos and gaming elites resent Larian. And the players, they feel threatened. An originally small studio of humble and organic beginnings that crowdfunded their first 2 projects, Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2, which both had early access, just as Baldur's Gate 3 did, that built a bond of trust over many years, was not supposed to ever make a game that appealed to so many people from all walks of gaming. Who or what is this upstart? By the lights of our AAA overlords, such a studio simply ought not to exist. And if they do exist, they need to stay in their lane. The caterwauling and complaining is nothing but pure envy, resentment, and the bellows of a gaming establishment that has sat on their laurels for far too long self-satisfied with their exploitative money-making schemes, incomplete games, lacking even a scintilla of the passion and devotion Larian brings to their craft. This is truly a case of the Empire versus the people. And believe me, Larian is part of the people. Every statement concerning BG3 content, or even the possibility of an expansion, on the part of Lord Vinca has echoed this, be his caution in making promises, to his own impressively theatrical contributions during the run-up to the game. Larian and Lord Vinca are a studio by the people, for the people, and of the people. And when you have this, how should I put it, anomalous setup, then it is perfectly understandable that the corpos in their digital castles in the sky feel fear, and more than anything else, envy and resentment, as they seek to stem the tide of what could possibly be a revolution in gaming history, a return to something that once was, but has been buried by the sands of time. Feature complete game with no microtransactions, and a game made primarily for the sake of art and fun. Larian has proven that you can make a game with these ingredients and still do very well by selling many copies of the game. And they have the corpos on the run. And ultimately, whatever comes or does not come in terms of expansions for Baldur's Gate 3, or whatever projects Larian decides to work on in the future, they have left an indelible mark on the gaming world, and will likely continue to do so. And with a little luck, others will strive to emulate them instead of resent them, or the people who enjoy their games. With these words, I wish you, the people, much continued fun in Faerun, and Larian as much fortune as humanly conceivable in whatever endeavor they decide to undertake in the future. Thanks for tuning in. But before I go, I'd like to invite you to my Discord server, where you can discuss Baldur's Gate 3, as well as other RPGs with like-minded people. And if you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. It's much appreciated, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.